My daughter-in-law blamed me for my son's accident. "You ruined my life!" she screamed. After that, she took my credit card, spent $50,000, and demanded more. Until one day, I found the report she had been hiding from day one. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought the worst day of my life could get worse. But standing in that sterile hospital corridor at 60 years old, watching my daughter-in-law Lennox collapse against the wall in theatrical grief, I realized I was wrong. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice echoing off the white tiles. "You killed him! You killed my Matthew!" The words hit me like physical blows. I stood there, my hands still shaking from signing the papers that officially declared my son dead, and watched as Lennox pointed an accusing finger at me. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streams, but her eyes burned with a fury I had never seen before. "Lennox, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We're both grieving. Don't you dare talk to me about grief." She pushed herself off the wall and stepped closer, her face twisted with rage. "You're the one who insisted he come to dinner tonight. You called him 3 times, Geneva. 3 times. He told me he was tired, that he wanted to stay home, but you kept pushing." I felt my knees buckle slightly. It was true. I had called Matthew 3 times that evening. It was Thursday, and Thursday had always been our night together ever since his father died 5 years ago. Matthew would come over, we'd eat together, watch old movies, and for a few hours, I wouldn't feel so alone in that big house. "I just wanted to see him," I said, my voice breaking. "It was our tradition." "Your tradition killed him," Lennox's voice cracked with emotion. "If you hadn't been so selfish, so needy, he would be home with me right now. He would be alive." The other families in the waiting area were staring now, their own grief temporarily forgotten as they witnessed this raw display of accusation. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back up. The roads were slippery, I tried to explain, though my voice sounded weak even to me. The rain wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't been driving to your house. Lennox grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through my cardigan. "He was rushing because you made him feel guilty for being late. You always made him feel guilty about everything." I stared at her, this woman who had been married to my son for only 2 years, but who now seemed to know him better than I did. Had I really made Matthew feel guilty? Had my loneliness after losing my husband turned me into some sort of burden on my only child? "You ended my life," Lennox continued, her grip tightening. "I'm 28 years old, Geneva. 28. I should be planning babies with my husband, growing old with him. Instead, I'm a widow because of you." The word widow seemed to break something inside her, and she collapsed against me, sobbing into my shoulder. I stood there, frozen, unsure whether to comfort her or push her away. The weight of her accusations sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and I meant it. "I'm so sorry, Lennox." She pulled back, her tear-stained face looking up at me with something that might have been hope. "Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't fix what you've done to me." I nodded, feeling older than my 60 years. "What can I do? How can I help?" Lennox wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. "I don't know. I can't even think straight. The funeral, the bills, finding a new place to live. Matthew handled everything. I don't know how to do any of this alone." The guilt twisted deeper in my stomach. Matthew had been independent, responsible, always taking care of everyone around him. If what Lennox was saying was true, if my neediness had really caused this accident, then I owed her everything. "You won't be alone," I heard myself saying. "I'll help you with whatever you need. The funeral expenses, the bills, anything." Lennox looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment, I saw something flash across her face. Relief? Calculation? It happened so quickly I convinced myself I had imagined it. "I can't accept charity," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's not charity," I insisted, pulling my purse closer to my body. It's responsibility. If I really caused this, then I need to make it right somehow. She studied my face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I guess I could use help with the immediate expenses, just until I figure out what to do next. I fumbled in my purse and pulled out my credit card, pressing it into her hands. Take this. Use whatever you need. Lennox stared down at the plastic card, her fingers closing around it slowly. Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to take advantage. You're not taking advantage, I said quickly, desperate to ease the crushing weight of my guilt. You're my family. You're all I have left of Matthew. She tucked the card into her purse and looked up at me with what I thought was gratitude. Thank you, Geneva. I don't know what I would have done without you. As we stood there in that hospital corridor, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and the quiet murmur of other grieving families, I felt like I had found some small way to atone for my selfishness. I had no idea that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The funeral director approached us then, a tall man in a dark suit with practiced sympathy in his eyes. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Chen, we need to discuss the arrangements. Lennox straightened up, wiping the last of her tears away. Yes, of course, Geneva will be handling the financial arrangements. I nodded, my hand already reaching for my checkbook. It felt like the least I could do, but as we followed the funeral director down the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed between Lennox and me in those few minutes. The blame she had placed on my shoulders felt like a weight I would carry forever, and her acceptance of my help felt like the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. I just knew that if I was responsible for destroying her happiness, I would spend whatever time I had left trying to repair the damage. 3 months after Matthew's funeral, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a credit card statement that made my hands shake. $50,000. In 12 weeks, Lennox had spent $50,000 of my money. I had expected the funeral costs. That was $8,000 right there. The flowers, the service, the reception afterward where Lennox had insisted on catering from the most expensive place in town because Matthew deserved the best. I had agreed, of course. Guilt has a way of opening your wallet. But this was something else entirely. La Perla Lingerie, $400. A spa weekend in Napa Valley, $3,000. Designer handbags from Nordstrom, $2,800. A week-long grief retreat in Sedona, $6,000. The list went on and on, each charge more extravagant than the last. My phone buzzed with a text from Lennox. Geneva, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? It's important. I folded the statement carefully and put it in my purse. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. After all, grief affected people differently, and I was hardly an expert on how a 28-year-old widow should behave. Lennox had moved into a luxury apartment downtown after claiming she couldn't bear to stay in the house she had shared with Matthew. I had paid the security deposit and first 3 months' rent without question, another $6,000 that seemed reasonable at the time. Now, walking up to the gleaming high-rise building, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The doorman nodded politely as he directed me to the 32nd floor. Even the elevator was more luxurious than anything in my modest neighborhood. Lennox opened the door wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair was freshly styled, her nails perfectly manicured. She looked nothing like the broken woman who had collapsed in my arms at the hospital 3 months ago. Geneva, thank God you're here. She stepped aside to let me in, and I gasped despite myself. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was all white leather and chrome, the kind of modern pieces I had seen in magazines but never in real life. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, and fresh orchids sat on every surface. This is beautiful, I managed to say, though something cold was spreading through my chest. Matthew always wanted to live somewhere like this, Lennox said, leading me to the pristine white sofa. He used to drive by buildings like this and dream about having a view like this someday. I perched carefully on the edge of the sofa, afraid to leave any mark on the spotless leather. Lennox, I got my credit card statement yesterday. Her face immediately crumpled and tears welled up in her eyes. It was remarkable how quickly she could summon them. Oh God, Geneva, I'm so sorry. I know it seems like a lot, but I can explain everything. I pulled the statement from my purse. $50,000, Lennox. In 3 months. I know it looks bad. She sat down beside me, her hand reaching for mine. But you have to understand, I've been so lost without Matthew. The grief counselor said I needed to take care of myself, to do things that brought me small moments of joy. A $400 lingerie set brings you joy? Her cheeks flushed pink. That was for Matthew. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I put on pretty things and pretend he's still here. The therapist says it's part of my healing process. I stared at her, trying to process this explanation. And the spa weekends? The retreat in Sedona? Self-care, Geneva. I was falling apart. I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping. My doctor said if I didn't start taking better care of myself, I might end up in the hospital. She squeezed my hand tighter. You wouldn't want that, would you? You wouldn't want to lose me too? The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Of course I didn't want to lose her. She was my only connection to Matthew now, the only family I had left. The apartment, though, I said weakly. This must cost $4,000 a month, she said quickly. But Geneva, I couldn't stay in our old place. Every corner reminded me of him. I was having panic attacks, couldn't function. This place, it's helping me heal. $4,000 a month. My monthly Social Security check was barely $2,000. I was dipping into my retirement savings every month just to keep up with her expenses, working extra shifts at the department store where I'd gotten a part-time job after my husband died. I don't know if I can keep up with this, I said quietly. Lennox's grip on my hand became almost painful. Please don't abandon me now. I'm just starting to feel human again. The grief support group I joined, the therapy sessions, they're all helping so much. But if I have to worry about money on top of everything else... She trailed off. But the implication was clear. I was all she had. If I pulled my support now, what might happen to her? Maybe we could find you a smaller place, I suggested. Something more affordable. Her eyes filled with tears again. Geneva, you know I would do anything to have Matthew back. Anything. But since that's impossible, this apartment is the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Being able to wake up and see something beautiful, to feel like there's still some light in the world. Please don't take that away from me. I looked around the gleaming apartment again, at the expensive furniture and the stunning view. My own house, the one I'd shared with my husband for 30 years before he died, suddenly felt shabby and small by comparison. Maybe Lennox deserved this. Maybe someone who had lost so much at such a young age deserved to have beautiful things. The spending has to slow down, I said finally. I can't keep up with $50,000 every 3 months. Of course, she said quickly, wiping her eyes. You're absolutely right. I got carried away. Grief makes you do stupid things sometimes. She stood up and walked to the window, her silhouette dramatic against the cityscape. I'll be more careful, I promise. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative, that I was being used, manipulated by the widow of my dead son, was too horrible to contemplate. There is one more thing, she said, turning back to me. My therapist recommended this intensive program in Switzerland. It's specifically for young widows, and she thinks it could really help me process everything that happened. My stomach dropped. Switzerland? It's expensive, I know. $25,000 for the 6-week program. But Geneva, if it could help me heal, if it could help me move forward and eventually become independent again. She walked back to me, kneeling beside the sofa and taking both my hands in hers. Think of it as an investment in my recovery. The sooner I can heal, the sooner I won't need your help anymore. $25,000. I would have to take out a loan against my house. I would have to work extra shifts until I was 70 just to pay it back. But looking at Lennox's tear-stained face, thinking about my responsibility for Matthew's death, I knew I didn't have a choice. When would you need to go? I asked. The relief that flashed across her face was unmistakable. Next month. I know it's short notice, but there was a cancellation and they can fit me in. I nodded slowly, already calculating how much I could borrow against my home equity. I'll figure it out. She threw her arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder. Thank you, Geneva. Thank you so much. I don't know what I'd do without you. As I held her, breathing in the scent of her expensive perfume, I tried to ignore the small voice in my head that whispered I was being played for a fool. After all, what kind of mother-in-law would I be if I didn't help my dead son's widow heal from the tragedy I had caused? But when she pulled back and I saw the satisfied smile she quickly tried to hide, that small voice got a little louder. 6 months after Matthew's death, I was working my third double shift of the week at Macy's when my manager, Carol, pulled me aside during my break. "Geneva, honey, you look exhausted," she said, her weathered face creased with concern. "When's the last time you took a day off?" I sat heavily in the break room chair, my feet aching in the sensible shoes I'd worn for 12 hours straight. At 60 years old, standing behind a cosmetics counter for 16 hours a day was taking its toll. "I need the money, Carol. My daughter-in-law is going through a rough time." Carol poured herself coffee from the perpetually brewing pot and sat across from me. "The one who lost her husband? That's rough. But honey, you're going to work yourself into the ground at this rate." I had taken out a second mortgage on my house to pay for Lennox's Switzerland trip. The monthly payments, combined with her apartment rent and her ongoing therapy expenses, meant I was barely keeping my head above water. Last week, I'd had to choose between buying groceries and paying my electric bill. I chose the groceries and spent 3 days in the dark until my next paycheck. "She's all the family I have left," I said, rubbing my temples where a headache was building. "I can't abandon her now." "What about you, though? Who's taking care of Geneva?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Lennox. "Emergency! Need $1,500 for car repairs. Mine broke down and I have important appointments this week. Can you transfer it tonight?" I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. $1,500. I didn't have $1,500. I barely had $50 in my checking account until my next paycheck. "Everything okay?" Carol asked, noticing my expression. "Fine," I lied, typing back. "I'll figure something out." That night, I drove to Lennox's apartment building, planning to suggest she take public transportation until we could figure out a more affordable solution. Maybe we could find a used car, something reliable but inexpensive. I was surprised to see her in the parking garage, standing next to a gleaming red BMW convertible. She was on her phone, laughing at something the person on the other end was saying. She looked radiant, her hair catching the overhead lights, wearing what looked like a brand new dress. No, I can't tonight," she was saying into the phone. "I have to deal with some family drama. But maybe tomorrow we can hit that new wine bar downtown." Family drama. Is that what I was to her now? I cleared my throat and she spun around, her face immediately shifting into an expression of distress. "Geneva, thank God you're here." She ended the call quickly and slipped her phone into her purse. "I've been so stressed about this car situation." I looked at the BMW, confused. "I thought your car broke down." "It did. This is a rental. The dealership said it would be at least a week before they could fix mine, and I have all these important appointments I can't miss. The rental is costing me $200 a day, which is why I need help covering it." Something didn't feel right. "What kind of appointments?" Her face flickered with annoyance before settling back into distress. "Grief counseling, meetings with lawyers about Matthew's estate, medical appointments for the stress-related health issues I've been having." She touched her forehead dramatically. "The doctor says I'm developing ulcers from all the anxiety." I walked around the BMW, noting the temporary tags. "This is quite a rental car. The insurance company upgraded me. Something about liability coverage." She linked her arm through mine, steering me away from the car. "Geneva, I know money is tight for you, and I feel terrible asking for help. But I'm still so fragile, and having to worry about transportation on top of everything else." There it was again. The guilt. The reminder that I was responsible for her fragile state. "Maybe we could look into a less expensive rental," I suggested weakly. Her grip on my arm tightened. "This is the only car they had available on short notice. Trust me, I tried to get something cheaper. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Geneva, I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't judge me for it. My heart began to race. What is it? I've been having thoughts. Dark thoughts. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier to just give up, join Matthew wherever he is. The blood drained from my face. Lennox, you don't mean that. The only thing that's keeping me going is knowing that you believe in my recovery, that you're willing to invest in my healing. Tears began to stream down her face. But if the financial stress becomes too much for you, if you decide I'm not worth it, don't say that, I said quickly. Of course you're worth it. Then you'll help me with the rental costs, just until my car is fixed? I thought about my nearly empty bank account, about the credit cards that were already maxed out. I'll find a way. The relief on her face was immediate. You're saving my life, Geneva. Literally saving my life. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. But every time I tried to examine that feeling closely, the guilt would wash over me again. I was the reason Matthew was dead. I was the reason Lennox was a widow at 28. If supporting her financially was killing me slowly, wasn't that just justice? The next morning, I was folding laundry in my basement when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. She was 75 and sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who noticed everything that happened in our quiet neighborhood. Geneva, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? I invited her in for coffee, grateful for the company. What do you mean? Well, I've noticed you haven't been keeping up your garden the way you usually do. And yesterday, I saw you walking home from the bus stop at nearly midnight. Honey, that's not safe for a woman your age. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I'd had to sell my car last month to help cover Lennox's expenses. I've been working extra shifts. Money's a little tight since Matthew died. Mrs. Patterson's eyes softened with sympathy. Oh, honey, but doesn't his wife have life insurance? A young couple like that should have had policies. I froze with my coffee cup halfway to my lips. Life insurance. In all the chaos of grief and guilt, I'd never thought to ask about life insurance. I'm not sure, I admitted. Well, even a basic policy through his employer would have been substantial enough to support that young woman for quite some time. Mrs. Patterson stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I remember when my Harold died, the insurance payout allowed me to live comfortably for years. After she left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. Should I ask Lennox about insurance? It seemed wrong somehow, mercenary. But if there was insurance money, why did she need my financial support? That afternoon, I drove past the luxury apartment complex where Lennox lived. I told myself I was just in the neighborhood, but really, I wanted to see if that BMW was still there. It was, and Lennox was leaning against it, dressed in what looked like a new outfit, laughing with a group of people her age. They all looked young, fashionable, carefree. Nothing about the scene suggested grief or fragility. One of them, a tall man with carefully styled hair, had his arm around Lennox's waist. She was leaning into him, smiling up at his face with an expression I hadn't seen since before Matthew's death. I parked across the street and watched as they all piled into expensive cars and drove away, Lennox in the BMW with the man who had his arm around her. For the first time since Matthew's funeral, I allowed myself to wonder if I was being lied to. That night, I called the insurance company that had covered Matthew's employee benefits. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone who could help me. Yes, Mrs. Chen, I see the policy here. Your son had a substantial life insurance benefit through his employer, $500,000, with his wife listed as the sole beneficiary, $500,000. While I was working myself to death, taking out loans and maxing out credit cards, Lennox had received $500,000. When was that paid out? I asked, my voice barely steady. Let me see. The claim was processed and paid 6 weeks after the death certificate was filed. So that would have been early February, before she asked me for help with the apartment, before Switzerland, before the car rental fees and the designer clothes and all the therapy sessions I'd been funding. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark kitchen, too stunned to turn on the lights. Everything I thought I knew about my situation was wrong. Lennox wasn't a struggling widow depending on my support to survive. She was a wealthy woman who was bleeding me dry for sport. The question now was, what else had she lied about? I spent 3 sleepless nights after discovering the insurance payout, my mind racing between rage and disbelief. $500,000. While I'd been working 16-hour shifts and eating ramen noodles to afford her rent, Lennox had been sitting on $500,000, but there was still a part of me that hoped for an explanation. Maybe she couldn't access the money yet. Maybe there were legal complications. Maybe I was missing something important. I decided to clean out Matthew's old room, the one that had remained untouched since he moved out years ago. I told myself it was time to let go, to make peace with his death. Really, I was looking for answers. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne, a scent that made my chest tighten with grief. His old desk sat in the corner, drawers filled with papers from high school and college. I methodically went through each drawer, not sure what I was looking for until I found it. In the bottom drawer, underneath his old yearbooks, was a manila folder labeled Important Documents. Inside were copies of his marriage certificate, his will, his insurance policies, and something that made my blood run cold. A copy of the police report from his accident. My hands shook as I opened it. I had never seen the official report, had never asked to see it. Lennox had handled everything with the authorities, claiming she wanted to spare me the painful details. The first page was standard information: date, time, location, weather conditions, rain, as I remembered, but as I read further, the details became confusing. According to the report, Matthew had been driving eastbound on Highway 101 at approximately 9:45 p.m. His vehicle had crossed the center line and collided head-on with a semi-truck. He was pronounced dead at the scene. But there was more. Under contributing factors, the investigating officer had noted, passenger reported driver appeared to be under the influence of alcohol. Blood alcohol content of driver could not be determined due to extent of injuries, but empty alcohol containers were found in the vehicle. Passenger. Lennox had been in the car. I read the sentence 3 more times, trying to make sense of it. Lennox had been in the car with Matthew when he died? She had never mentioned this. In all our conversations about that night, she had always spoken as if she had been home, waiting for him to return from dinner with me. The report continued. Passenger Lennox Chen reported that she and her husband had been arguing prior to the accident. She stated that he had been drinking at dinner and became agitated when she expressed concern about his driving. According to the passenger, the driver lost control of the vehicle while reaching for his cell phone, which had been ringing repeatedly. My dinner. Matthew had been coming to my dinner, and Lennox had been with him. They had been arguing about his drinking, but Matthew barely drank. A glass of wine occasionally, maybe a beer while watching football. He certainly wasn't the type to drive drunk, but the most damning detail was in the final paragraph. Passenger admitted to attempting to grab the steering wheel when she realized the driver was losing control, but was unable to prevent the collision. I set the report down with shaking hands. Either this was all wrong, or Lennox had been lying to me from the moment we stood in that hospital corridor. I called the investigating officer whose name was listed on the report. Detective Rodriguez was still with the highway patrol, and he agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the police station. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. He remembered the case immediately. Terrible accident, he said, shaking his head. Young couple, their whole lives ahead of them. What questions did you have about the report? I'm Matthew's mother, I said. I never saw this report before today. I'm confused about some of the details. He nodded sympathetically. The wife handled everything with us. She was pretty shaken up, understandably. What specifically is confusing you? The drinking. The report says Matthew had been drinking, but that doesn't sound like him at all. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. According to the passenger, that's your daughter-in-law, right? They had been at a family dinner where alcohol was served. She said he'd had several glasses of wine and maybe a beer, and that she was concerned about his ability to drive safely. But the blood alcohol test couldn't be performed due to the severity of the trauma, he finished. So we had to rely on witness testimony. The passenger was very cooperative, gave a detailed statement about the events leading up to the accident. I felt sick. What did she say happened exactly? He consulted his notes again. She said they left the dinner around 9:15. Your son was agitated about something. She wasn't clear about what. And was driving aggressively. She said she tried to get him to pull over, but he refused. Then his phone started ringing, and when he reached for it, he lost control of the vehicle. She said they were coming from a family dinner at my house? That's right. He looked up from his notes. She mentioned that you had been calling repeatedly, which was causing stress between them. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I couldn't taste anything anyway. Everything Lennox had told me was a lie. Not just omissions or half-truths, complete fabrications. Detective Rodriguez, is there any possibility that the passenger's account wasn't accurate? He studied my face carefully. Ma'am, I have to ask, has something come to light that makes you question her statement? I thought about the insurance money, about her expensive lifestyle, about the lies she'd been telling me for months. I think my daughter-in-law might not have been entirely truthful about what happened that night. He was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Chen, I should tell you that there were some inconsistencies in her story that bothered me at the time, but without additional evidence or witnesses, there wasn't much we could do. What kind of inconsistencies? Well, for one thing, she claimed your son had been drinking heavily, but the restaurant where you had dinner that night told us they only served coffee and soft drinks. Said it was a family establishment that didn't have a liquor license. My heart stopped. What restaurant? Place called Mama's Kitchen on Elm Street. Your daughter-in-law said that's where you had the family dinner. I had never heard of Mama's Kitchen, and I certainly hadn't had dinner with Matthew and Lennox that night. Matthew had been coming to my house for our usual Thursday dinner, alone, just like every week. Detective, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't have dinner with them at any restaurant that night. Matthew was coming to my house for dinner by himself. It was our weekly tradition since his father died. Detective Rodriguez's pen stopped moving across his notepad. You're saying there was no family dinner at Mama's Kitchen? I've never been to Mama's Kitchen in my life. And Matthew was definitely not drinking before he left to come see me. We spoke on the phone around 8 o'clock, and he sounded completely sober. The detective leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Mrs. Chen, I think we need to revisit this case. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the police report spread out in front of me, seeing it with completely new eyes. Every detail that had seemed tragic but random now looked like part of a carefully constructed lie. Lennox had been in the car. They had been arguing. She had admitted to grabbing the steering wheel. What if Matthew hadn't been the one driving recklessly? What if Lennox had caused the accident and then crafted an elaborate story to cover her tracks? What if my son's death wasn't my fault at all, but hers? And what if she had been using my guilt to fund her lifestyle ever since, knowing that I would never question her story because I believed I was responsible for Matthew's death? I thought about all the money I'd given her, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep thinking about how my neediness had killed my son. Every dollar I'd transferred to her account, every extra shift I'd worked, every meal I'd skipped to pay her bills. It had all been based on a lie. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was pure and clean and righteous. For the first time in 7 months, I wasn't drowning in guilt. I was ready to fight back. But first, I needed to know exactly what had happened in that car on the night my son died. And I had a feeling that the truth was going to be worse than anything I could imagine. Detective Rodriguez called me 3 days later with news that confirmed my worst fears. Mrs. Chen, we've reopened the investigation into your son's accident. After reviewing the case files and conducting additional interviews, we've discovered several significant discrepancies in the original witness statement. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. What did you find? For starters, the restaurant your daughter-in-law claimed you all ate at that night. They have no record of any reservation under your name or hers. The manager remembers that evening clearly because they had a small fire in the kitchen and closed early. No customers were served dinner that night. I closed my eyes, feeling vindicated and sick at the same time. So she lied about the dinner. That's not all. We spoke to your son's co-workers, and they confirmed he rarely drank alcohol. His boss said Matthew was known for being extremely careful about driving, especially after losing his father to a car accident. Then why did she say he was drinking? Detective Rodriguez's voice was grave. Mrs. Chen, I believe your daughter-in-law was driving the car that night. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my kitchen chair, trying to process what he was telling me. We found additional witness testimony that wasn't properly documented in the original report. A trucker who saw the accident happen said the driver appeared to be much smaller than your son. He assumed it was a young woman behind the wheel, but the police report said Matthew was driving. Your daughter-in-law arrived at the scene before the paramedics and claimed to have been thrown clear of the vehicle on impact. In the chaos, no one questioned her version of events. She was coherent, cooperative, and seemed genuinely distraught. I thought about Lennox's performance in the hospital corridor, the way she had collapsed against me with such perfect timing. What happens now? We're building a case for filing charges, vehicular manslaughter, filing a false police report, insurance fraud. But Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you, has she obtained any money from you based on these false claims? My laugh was bitter. About $75,000 so far. That would add fraud and theft charges to the list. We'll need you to document all the financial transactions. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, feeling a mix of relief and rage so intense it made me dizzy. Matthew hadn't been drunk. He hadn't been driving recklessly. He hadn't died because of my selfishness. He had died because his wife was behind the wheel, probably texting or distracted, and when she caused the accident that killed him, she had looked at his dead body and decided to save herself by destroying me. My phone buzzed with a text from Lennox. Geneva, I'm feeling much better after the Switzerland program. Ready to start fresh. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I have exciting news about my recovery. I stared at the message, remembering the scared, broken woman who had sobbed in my arms 7 months ago. The woman who had convinced me that I was responsible for ruining her life. The woman who had been spending my retirement savings while sitting on $500,000 in insurance money. I typed back, yes, your apartment, 7 p.m., we need to talk. The next evening, I stood outside Lennox's luxury apartment building with a folder in my hands. Inside was everything. The police report, bank statements showing all my transfers to her, documentation of the insurance payout, and Detective Rodriguez's preliminary findings. My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, I felt calm, focused, clear. Lennox opened the door wearing a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her skin was glowing, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like a woman who had been living very well indeed. Geneva, you look tired, honey. Are you taking care of yourself? She embraced me with what seemed like genuine affection, but now I could see the calculation behind her concerned expression. I'm fine, I said, stepping into the apartment. It looked even more expensive than before. New artwork on the walls, fresh orchids everywhere, a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Are you celebrating something? I asked, nodding toward the champagne. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, that. Yes, actually. I wanted to share my good news with you. She gestured for me to sit on the white leather sofa. Geneva, I've met someone. I sat down carefully, placing my folder on the coffee table. Someone? His name is David. He's wonderful, kind, successful, understanding about my situation. She clasped her hands together, her engagement ring catching the light. Wait, engagement ring? Lennox, is that... We're engaged, she burst out, holding up her hand to display a massive diamond. I know it seems fast, but when you've been through tragedy like I have, you learn not to waste time when you find happiness. I stared at the ring, which had to be worth at least $20,000. When did this happen? Last week, while I was in Switzerland. David was there on business and we met at the hotel bar. It was like fate, Geneva, like Matthew sent him to me. The audacity of it took my breath away. She had used my money to fund a luxury vacation where she met her new fiancé, and now she was claiming my dead son had somehow orchestrated the romance. That's wonderful, I said flatly. I'm happy for you. She sat down across from me, her expression becoming more serious. Geneva, there's something else we need to discuss. David and I are planning to move to his estate in Napa Valley after we're married. It's a fresh start for me, away from all the painful memories here. Of course. The thing is, I won't need this apartment anymore, and I'll be able to be financially independent with David taking care of me. So I wanted to thank you for everything you've done and let you know that you won't need to support me anymore. I almost laughed. After bleeding me dry for 7 months, now that she had found a wealthier victim, she was graciously releasing me from my obligations. Actually, Lennox, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I opened my folder and pulled out the police report. I found something interesting while cleaning out Matthew's room, her eyes fixed on the papers in my hands, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw genuine fear cross her face. What is that? The police report from Matthew's accident. The real one. I held up the first page. It's very interesting reading. Did you know it says you were in the car that night? The color drained from her face. Geneva, I can explain. Can you? Because according to this report, you told the police that Matthew had been drinking at a family dinner we all had together at Mama's kitchen. But I've never been to Mama's kitchen, Lennox. And we never had dinner together that night. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. You don't understand. I was in shock, traumatized. I might have gotten some details confused. You also told them Matthew was driving drunk and aggressively, but the restaurant you claimed we ate at was closed that night due to a kitchen fire. So where exactly did Matthew do all this drinking? Her back was to me, but I could see her reflection in the window. Her face was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. And here's the really interesting part, I continued, pulling out another document. Matthew's life insurance paid out $500,000 6 weeks after his death. To you, while I was working double shifts to pay your rent. She spun around, and now the mask was completely off. The grief, the fragility, the helpless widow act, all of it was gone. What remained was cold, calculating, and angry. You have no right to go through my personal business. Your personal business? I stood up, my voice rising. You made it my business when you convinced me I was responsible for killing my son. You made it my business when you took $75,000 from me while sitting on $500,000 in insurance money. I never asked you for that money, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, you just told me it was all my fault and then graciously allowed me to bankrupt myself trying to make amends. I pulled out the final document. The police are reopening the investigation, Lennox. They want to know why the witness testimony doesn't match the physical evidence. They want to know why you lied about everything that happened that night. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her weighing her options. Finally, she sat down heavily on the sofa, her perfect composure cracking. You don't know what it was like, she said quietly. Being married to Matthew, he was so controlling, so demanding, always wanting to know where I was, what I was doing. That night, we had been fighting about money. He found out about some purchases I'd made, and he was furious. So you killed him? It was an accident. The words exploded out of her. We were arguing in the car, and he was yelling at me, and I grabbed the wheel. I didn't mean for anything to happen. But when the truck hit us, and I realized he was dead, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. I panicked. I knew everyone would blame me, so I switched seats before the paramedics arrived. The confession hung in the air between us. My son was dead because his wife couldn't handle being held accountable for her spending, and when her reckless reaction killed him, she had decided to blame me instead. And then you saw an opportunity, I said, my voice deadly calm. A guilt-ridden mother-in-law who would do anything to make amends for her imaginary responsibility. Geneva, please. I know how this looks, but I was grieving too. I loved Matthew. You loved Matthew's life insurance policy. You loved having a scapegoat for his death. You loved having a steady income from someone too guilt-ridden to ask questions. I gathered up my papers and stood. The police will be here tomorrow to arrest you. I suggest you call a lawyer. Geneva, wait! She jumped up, reaching for my arm. We can work this out. I'll pay you back every penny. David is wealthy. I can get the money. Just don't let them arrest me. Please. I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times she had grabbed me like this when she needed something. All the tears, all the manipulation, all the nights I had lain awake hating myself for killing my son. Lennox, I said quietly, I wouldn't save you if you were drowning. Then I walked out of her apartment and didn't look back. For the first time in 7 months, I felt free. 2 years later, I was sitting on the porch of my small cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My hands, no longer shaking from exhaustion and stress, held a warm cup of coffee as I read the final court document that had arrived yesterday. Lennox had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter, insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and elder financial abuse. Her wealthy fiancé had disappeared the moment the charges became public, leaving her with only a court-appointed attorney and a mountain of legal bills. The insurance company had recovered most of the $500,000 she had fraudulently obtained, and I had been awarded full restitution for the $75,000 she had stolen from me. More importantly, Matthew's death certificate had been amended to reflect the true circumstances of the accident. I folded the letter and set it aside, breathing in the salt air. The cottage was tiny compared to the house I had shared with my husband for 30 years, but it was mine, and it was peaceful. I had sold the big house with all its painful memories and moved here to the coast, where Matthew and I used to take weekend trips when he was young. The part-time job at the local bookstore barely covered my expenses, but I didn't need much anymore. My days were simple now, opening the store, helping customers find their next great read, closing up at 5, and coming home to this view. On weekends, I walked the beach, collected shells, and slowly healed from the trauma of those 7 months when I believed I had killed my own son. The hardest part hadn't been discovering Lennox's lies, it had been forgiving myself for believing them. Detective Rodriguez had explained that elder abuse often worked this way, with sophisticated manipulators targeting people in vulnerable emotional states. But knowing I had been a victim didn't immediately erase the shame of having been fooled so completely. I had spent months in therapy, working through the guilt, the anger, and the grief. Not just grief for Matthew, but grief for the relationship we might have had if I hadn't been so consumed by my own guilt and Lennox's manufactured emergencies. Grief for the time I had lost, the money I had sacrificed, the parts of myself I had given away to someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient victim. My phone rang, interrupting my morning meditation. It was Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to let you know that Lennox's appeal was denied. The sentence stands. Thank you for calling, I said. How is she doing? Not well, from what I understand. Prison doesn't suit people who are used to luxury lifestyles funded by other people's money. I felt a small twinge of something that might have once been pity, but it passed quickly. Lennox had made her choices. She had chosen to grab the steering wheel in anger, causing the accident that killed Matthew. She had chosen to switch seats and lie to the police. She had chosen to manipulate me with fake grief while spending my life savings on designer clothes and luxury vacations. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something personal? Detective Rodriguez's voice was gentle. How are you doing, really? I looked out at the ocean, where a family of dolphins was playing in the morning waves. I'm doing well. Better than I have in years, actually. I'm glad to hear that. You know, in 20 years of police work, I've seen a lot of victims of financial elder abuse. Most of them never fully recover, either financially or emotionally, but you seem to have found a way to rebuild. I had help, I admitted. Good therapy, supportive neighbors, and the knowledge that my son's death wasn't my fault. That made all the difference. After we hung up, I walked down to the beach for my morning ritual. Every day for the past 2 years, I had come to this same spot where a large piece of driftwood had been worn smooth by the waves. I would sit here and talk to Matthew, telling him about my day, about the books I was reading, about the peace I had finally found. Today was different, though. Today felt like an ending and a beginning. "I got the final court papers yesterday," I said to the waves. "It's over, Matthew. She's going to prison for what she did to you and what she did to me afterward." A pelican landed on a rock nearby, watching me with curious eyes. "I know you probably wouldn't want her to suffer, even after everything. You always had a bigger heart than me. But I'm not sorry she's facing consequences. What she did was evil, and evil should have consequences." The pelican took off, soaring over the waves with effortless grace. "I miss you every day, but I'm not drowning in guilt anymore. I know you wouldn't want me to live that way. You'd want me to be happy, to find peace, to maybe even help other people who've been through what I went through." I had been thinking about that lately. Mrs. Patterson, my old neighbor, had called last week to tell me about another widow in the neighborhood who was being pressured by family members to support their expensive lifestyles. The woman was too embarrassed to ask for help, too loyal to say no, too tired to fight back. "Maybe it's time for me to do more than just survive," I said to the ocean. "Maybe it's time to help other people recognize the signs of what happened to me." That afternoon, I walked into the local community center and spoke to the director about starting a support group for seniors who had experienced financial abuse. She was immediately interested. "We've been getting more calls about this type of situation," she said. "Adult children draining their parents' accounts, fake grandchildren calling for emergency money, romance scams targeting lonely widows and widowers. We definitely need someone who understands what these victims go through." 6 months later, I was leading weekly meetings for a group of 12 people who had all been targeted by family members, romantic partners, or strangers who saw their vulnerability as an opportunity. There was Margaret, whose daughter had stolen her identity to take out credit cards. Robert, whose grandson had forged checks from his account. Linda, whose new boyfriend had convinced her to invest her life savings in his non-existent business. Each story was different, but the shame was the same. The feeling of having been stupid, gullible, naive, the guilt over not seeing the signs sooner, the isolation that came from being too embarrassed to tell anyone what had happened. "The first thing you need to understand," I would tell new group members, "is that being targeted doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you human. These predators are skilled at identifying and exploiting our deepest vulnerabilities, our love for family, our desire to help, our fear of being alone. They study us like psychologists and attack us where we're most defenseless." I would tell them about Lennox, about how she had used my grief and guilt to control me for months, about how even trained professionals had initially believed her story because she was so convincing, so prepared, so willing to play the long game. "Recovery isn't just about getting your money back," I would explain. "It's about getting yourself back, your confidence, your ability to trust your instincts, your right to live without shame." One evening, as I was locking up the community center after a particularly emotional group session, I found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. My name was written on the front in careful cursive handwriting. Inside was a letter from Lennox. "Geneva," it began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I've had 2 years to think about what I did, and I know there's no excuse for any of it. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but something made me continue. I was selfish and cruel, and I destroyed the life of the only person who ever really loved me. I killed Matthew because I couldn't control my temper, and then I spent months torturing the woman who raised him. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I'm more sorry than I know how to express." The letter went on for several pages, detailing her remorse, her therapy sessions, her growing understanding of the damage she had caused. She mentioned that she had seen news coverage of my support group work and was proud that I had found a way to help others. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter concluded, "and I don't expect you to write back. I just wanted you to know that Matthew would be proud of the woman you've become since his death. I took everything from you, But you built something beautiful from the ruins. I hope someday I can do the same, though I know I don't deserve the chance. I folded the letter and put it in my purse. I wouldn't respond to it, but I wouldn't throw it away either. It felt important to acknowledge that even someone who had caused such damage could potentially grow and change. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow was the 2nd anniversary of Matthew's corrected death certificate, the day when the official record was finally changed to reflect the truth about how he died. I had planned to visit his grave, to bring the wildflowers he had loved as a child, to tell him how different my life looked now compared to those dark months when I believed I was responsible for his death. But tonight, I felt like he was already here with me, in the peace I had found, in the work I was doing to help others, in the quiet satisfaction of having survived something that could have destroyed me completely. The woman who had stood in that hospital corridor 2 years ago, broken and guilt-ridden and desperate to atone for an imaginary sin, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more careful, but also more compassionate. I raised my wine glass to the stars, to my son's memory, and to my own hard-won freedom. Here's to the truth, I said aloud, and to the courage to keep living once you've found it. The ocean whispered its approval, and for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.